Hey, Chetan, welcome to the podcast. I really appreciate your time today. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, my name is Chetan Saiya. I'm the founder and CEO of Zoomifier Corporation. This is my third venture. I've got more than 25 plus years doing startups, successful startups, always in a field that aligns with use of content in business workflows. So first, one of my first ventures was a digital asset management solution. We built the world's first digital asset manager so that you can put all your content, images, videos, PDFs in a single repository way back, even before internet in 93, 94. My second venture was called Asset Link, where we pioneered a new category called marketing operations management. And that company then got acquired by SAS. And then after that, I started Zoomifier. So I'm a serial entrepreneur, you can say.
So what inspired you to start Zoomifier?
There are two things. One was, as I was deeply involved in the marketing operations, I saw that the way buyers were beginning to buy was changing. And marketers understood that very quickly. And so they first adopted what we now call marketing automation, going from physical emails and other medium to beginning to use internet, social media, emails. However, I also saw that while they were automating, sales remained similar, very, very static, same as what they were doing forever. Last 200 years, actually. And so so that's where I saw an opportunity that, if we can help sales streamline the way they sell, then I think it can dramatically increase the performance in sales, increase revenue, dramatically decrease the costs, and so overall profitability, market share, so all the good stuff. But what we found, though, was sales was very reluctant. Sales teams and sales organizations were very reluctant to change because they are very quarterly and time-focused, and they cannot afford to experiment because their commissions and their everything depends on that. And so change is very difficult. This is where we found that fundamentally, there was no choice because the buyer behavior had changed. So in short, if I have to summarize why I started Zoomifier, was I saw that there were fundamental changes happening in how buyers were going to buy. And so that would have required enterprise sales to realign their whole selling process. And I saw that as a big opportunity.
So you'd mentioned streamlining the sales process or streamlining the focus of the sales team. How is it that you're accomplishing that?
Very good question. This is a $1 million question, by the way, that everyone is very keen on resolving now. So again, let's go back to how buyers want to buy, because the simplest thing about sales alignment is you have to align with the way buyers want to buy. And so there are three fundamental things that buyers are doing today that are behaviorally different from the way they used to do before. The first is they are very reluctant and almost insistent on not meeting salespeople. Now, this is a huge issue, right? Because as a salesperson, the first thing you want to do, especially in B2B enterprise selling, is to meet your target audience and impress upon them how knowledgeable you are, how great you are, and how great your product and offering is. So if that starting point is cut off, most sales organizations feel lost. Now, this used to be a trickle, but post-COVID, that has become almost a norm. No one wants to meet in person, and most of them are even reluctant meeting online because they're just jaded. So then what's the alternative? So when they ask the customers or the buyers saying, okay, if you're not willing to meet, how do I sell? They say, well, send me some information. That's the normal 95 to 99% response that most salespeople get. The problem then the sales teams have is most of the content was designed as a leave behind. And it always assumed that the salesperson was in front of the customer when they were using that content. For example, when you use PowerPoint, it's small bullets that by themselves make no sense. It's a person who's articulating. Similarly, when you leave the meeting, you leave behind a brochure that is so verbose that you normally look at it more as a reference guide rather than to get the meaning of the offering that you're trying to buy. So now if that person was removed at the beginning, how do you engage your customer? So that's been a huge second alignment challenge. The third important thing is that while customers are looking for information, they have very little attention span. Everyone's just completely busy with all kinds of other things that are going on. Everyone's multitasking. There's constant interruptions through social media, emails, telephone, and text messages, and so on. And so the idea is, A, how do you continue your sales process without meeting? How do you provide them content that can represent you, your organization, and your offerings properly? And how do you maintain their attention span? So these are the three parts where the current sales teams and the sales processes are completely misaligned, and that's what we are aligning. Does that make sense so far?
It makes complete sense. Okay. I feel like I experience that every day, that there's people who are just reluctant, or people who like, okay, yeah, send me some information about it that they may or may not take the opportunity to look at. And then, yeah, it's a very, I mean, even my attention span some days when it comes to things like that is just very short. You just need to be very to the point of, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. Let's move on. What does your product do to solve those things?
Very good question. So what's interesting is it does exactly what you're doing in a way, but I will articulate it further. So, 10 years ago, if you were doing what you're currently doing, you would have written a column in some newspaper or in some magazine, right? Textual. But today, for sure, no one's going to read that. So you have kind of converted for the same information in a video format, because you believe that it's a lot more engaging. You can edit it to a snackable level. That's exactly what we are doing for sales. The first important part is we are saying that we need to augment, not replace, but augment a salesperson with additional content that helps them open the door. So content is no longer leave behind, but it's a door opener. Huge transformational stuff going on right now. The second part is that such a content has to be immensely engaging for the user. And that has about 90% of time translated into video-rich content. So how do you provide an enterprise sales team infrastructure so that they can, not some Hollywood studio, but they can create video-rich content? How do they collect it, create it, manage it, edit it, personalize it, share it, and track it? So we provide that entire infrastructure to do all of that stuff. That only takes about 15 minutes of training, and that too on their own through video-based training. So it's like eating your own dog food, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the second part. Then comes a third very important part, which is how do you keep this video-rich content snackable, which means you never expect anyone to spend more than 2 or 3 minutes at the most. But if you did a really good job in those 2 or 3 minutes, you get 3 or 4 minutes, then you get 10 minutes, and you get 15 minutes. And at some point, as they are more and more engaged and nurtured, they can give you an hour, or they will call you and say, come over, because I really like what you do, and this is exactly what I wanted, right? So how do you build an infrastructure that strings this kind of information together, almost like Netflix, so that as you have finished an episode, the next recommendation comes up. But that recommendation varies from person to person. So there's a whole lot of intelligence that gets into it. That's the other interesting aspect of it. Because, you might go down one path on buying, I might go on completely different. As an example, someone might be price sensitive, someone may be caring about performance, someone else about security, flexibility, etc. So you have to give you have to recommend the next right content to the right person. So this is where we have built what we call engagement intelligence. How do you engage people, track and monitor their engagement, and then from that derive intelligence by going back and forth with them to see what they like and don't like. It's almost like having eyes and ears of a salesperson who's seeing where did they kind of glaze off, or where did they really feel more interested, et cetera, et cetera. So we are doing that and then continue to engage them. And while all this is going on, the sales team gets constant feedback as to how their engagement is working, who's most engaged, who's the next person they should be sending something, and what should they be using to engage them. So everything I just talked about is all in one single box, out of the box. And then the other important thing we have done in this is we have made it extremely risk-free for sales organizations to use it. So they can start for free. They can be up and running within 15 to 20 minutes per person. And then as they start seeing the value, they can buy in a very incremental way by doing month-to-month subscriptions, et cetera. So we have a very full product-led growth-based solution, fully software as service business model, and we keep growing customers.
So you mentioned two things that I want to dig a little deeper on. First is your customers. Who specifically are you targeting as customers?
Okay. Traditionally, because we were initially in the research mode on all of this customer engagement, the behavioral dynamics of people, the strategies around content and so on, we first worked with some extremely, extremely large companies. These were large giants in media and entertainment who were using our software for sales, ad sales. We had large sports organizations and teams who were using it for sponsorships and promotions. We had large hospitality brands, the really five-star hotel chains who were using our software for event management for business and individual events. Each of those are very large ticket items that have to deliver an experience of what their stuff is. So that's where content played a very big role in the first place. But as we built that solution with them and honed everything, we realized that this was actually relevant for any and every company, especially for small and mid-sized companies, which were fighting against incumbents with newer ideas. So then we just opened the whole solution up from an enterprise level to mid and small ones. And so today, any company that has to engage with their customers through direct sales team is our target customer.
I would assume that your early adoption with the larger organizations helped you build out the platform to support everybody now, correct?
That is correct. That is correct. And what was most important for us to understand as we were doing this was two things. Number one, security and confidentiality part, because you're talking about pricing information, personal information about customers, and also we have to make sure that the platform was immensely secure. And then comes the second very, very important part, which is sales people are very pragmatic, but they're very impatient. So the solution has to be extremely straightforward and easy to use, and more importantly, fun to use, so that they're motivated to go back to it. Unlike most of the CRM systems that they hate because they end up just entering data into it, right? Here, they don't have to enter in data, but they keep getting data from the system in terms of engagement and so on. And so by honing those two things, we have found a lot more successful user adoption and growth.
That makes complete sense. I kind of despise updating my CRM because it is just me entering data endlessly into it. And then it comes back to managing it. Yeah, I get it in the first time, but I'm not great at going in and being like, oh, I've done this touch base. I need to go and update that. So that's on me. I had another question about, you had mentioned content being more part of the sales funnel now, which I completely agree with. Do you think there will be a trend of more and more organizations making this realization that content has to be a part of their sales strategy?
That's a very good question. I think there are certain industries which inherently understood and realized that. The ones like media and entertainment, sports, hospitality, etc., that I just talked about. But what's surprising is now we are progressively seeing similar trend in some very mainstream industries, such as insurance or manufacturing, higher education, and so on, each of which is beginning to realize that to scale with the millennials and Gen Zs, you will need not just content, but engaging, snackable, bite-sized content. That's one aspect. The second interesting thing we have found is there are certain businesses which have a channel that sells their products. Insurance is a great example. And so there's an additional requirement that comes up. Not only do you have to deliver engaging content through your channel, you also have to let your partners, the distributors, personalize the content, because they are adding value by saying, here's why I recommend this product versus another product. And so there's a whole bunch of realization of the importance of the content, but also these companies are beginning to define exactly how they are going to use content to engage their customers.
So you've mentioned the word snackable a couple of times, and I think it's a great word when it comes to content and really the attention span of anybody nowadays. I think it's less than probably 3 minutes when it comes to any sort of anything. Does Zoomify help coach the organizations that they work with on creating that type of content?
Yes, we do. It's one of the funnest part of our job to whenever we get a new customer, we sit with their heads of sales, marketing, product teams, etc., and help them define first what we broadly call content strategy. Meaning, take your existing customer and business strategy, how do you transform that into a content strategy, and how do you then articulate that in terms of some clear artifacts that will help the sales team. For example, when most people talk about sales content, they talk about presentations and brochures, right? The problem is you can only use presentation once you get a meeting. And so the idea is, what's the first thing you would send something to pique that interest to meet you? Well, we call that a teaser. And so we're going to define certain characteristics on how you create a teaser and what should it have and how long it should be. Ideally, that's actually under 30 seconds, because that's all the time you get before someone would throw it away the first time, right? Once you do that, in some cases, you get a meeting because your teaser was that great and that piqued someone's interest. But most of the time, they say, well, that's interesting, send me more. And then that's the information we call explainer, which says, here is a problem that you were trying to solve. And if you don't solve it, here are the problems, here's what will happen to you, et cetera, et cetera. So that's an explainer. Again, taking them to a point where they can get where a salesperson would get a meeting. Beyond that comes presentations, but then people, not everyone shows up for the presentation. Half the folks do, others are online and doing multitasking, and third set doesn't show up. So how do you leave behind additional information that engages and nurtures more people? So we really help them define this whole content framework and content strategy on how to do all this.
I think that that's great, especially in the day and age where you're seeing more and more short form video content out there with Reels and TikTok, and just seeing the popularity of those platforms and the success there, that you're starting to see more and more brands go that direction to either gain awareness for their brand or, really go super bizarre. I know that one of the brands that I saw the other day was like Nutter Butter. They have these weird, super weird videos on TikTok, and it's like, but it's gaining attention. You hadn't thought about them in years, and you're like, oh, they're doing this weird thing. Now they have all of this publicity because they did something that's just very, very bizarre.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a very interesting new cerebral exercise that everyone's going through to say, how do I engage people when I'm not there, right? And it's really very interesting when you get the right mix of these things. One of the other thing that we have observed is people who eventually get it are very excited to share it with others, especially in non-competitive industries. So we do cross-pollinate marketing services, marketing communications folks, brand folks, as well as sales teams with among our customers. And then it's really fun when they talk to each other about all of this stuff.
Given that you've got a background in software development and business strategy, how do you foresee technology further reshaping the future of sales engagement and the customer interaction, especially with the emergence of the AI?
Very, very good question. Of course, I just came back from a conference, and every banner had AI powered and AI driven. Yep. Which actually is sad, because then everyone says, so what are they doing? It actually confuses people more than helps them. I see AI being very relevant in two ways. And it's an interesting 80-20 kind of a rule. 80% of the time, people are just focused on generative AI or Gen AI, as we call it, right? Whether automatically creating your emails or content or presentations, etc. And then there is a second part, which is the machine learning part that really is very data driven. I think while Gen AI gets this 80 to almost 100% lion's share of attention, I feel its relevance and usefulness is about 20%. The bigger part, and it is very useful, for generating certain email templates, etc. But you still need proper human intervention on top to make sure it's really good. The more powerful part in sales, I feel, is the machine learning piece. The idea being, we have got, say, 200 salespeople. We have got 8 to 10 years of engagement history, and we are engaging with thousands of users across multiple transactions. How do I use all that data to gain certain insights and intelligence so that I can fine-tune my team's performance, kind of thing, right? And so we are really honing into that area in addition to doing all the Gen AI stuff. How do we do that? Is we have built a very unique framework and infrastructure whereby any and every kind of content that the customer is engaging with happens through same app or same place in web browser. And we are able to track any and every piece of engagement, which we then give back. And we give about 30 to 50 different dimensions of data about each engagement. Things like, who did you engage? What time did you engage them at? How long did they spend on each part of your content? Where did they do it from? Meaning which geographical location? What kind of device were they on? Was it a mobile or desktop? What kind of OS were they using? Because and many, many more things, right? Each and every aspect of this gives you hints about the level of engagement, the quality of engagement, the demographics, and their buying intent, etc. So from a trend perspective, I really believe that if you are a sales organization, the thing you should first focus on is, how do I assimilate all the important in customer engagement information, because that's your gold mine. And then you can just mine it in all kinds of right ways.
Yeah, I would agree that machine learning is the unsexy part of AI, but it's going to be the biggest differentiator in business in the next 5 years. If you have the ability to train a model on a bunch of data that allows you to either further your marketing reach or your sales, that's going to be a huge impact for you as an organization. So like you said, it may not be it is definitely the 80-20. A lot of people are more worried about the generating content idea versus actually using the models to analyze the data and identify either key trends or differentiators that would propel them into the stratosphere in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. Yeah. Completely
So,
agree.
since we're talking about trends a little bit, I've talked to quite a few other business owners who have noticed an impact because to their business because of consumer confidence. Is that one of the things that you're seeing in your organization?
Yeah, consumer confidence, and you mean in terms of trust?
Not necessarily trust, just like their willingness to buy.
Okay. Well, people will buy only if they have a need, right? At the end of the day. I mean, there are certain things we pick up on like a chewing gum on the grocery checkout, but most of the big ticket items are purchased to satisfy a need. Now, what's interesting though, from a sales organization perspective, is often the customer does not know that they needed something. It's everyone's happy with their status quo, right? So that's one issue. And so one of the important thing content does very well, and we help our customers do this very well, is articulate the problem that they are solving in the right way. So that's the first part, which is how do you undo the status quo where customers saying, well, I don't need this, I'm happy. The second very important part that comes up is the indecision. Sometimes you're happy not to do something because you don't want to put your neck out there and then fail, right? No one got fired for not doing anything sometimes in these organizations. And so the idea is, how do you help your partners and your clients establish the value of their solution or offerings by solving the problem and how they solve it. So it's about I think the confidence issue comes when the vendors just try to push product down someone's throat without having alignment with their needs or without understanding the buyer psychology. And if you solve that properly, things get a lot more streamlined.
If you're getting on a call with someone and all they're trying to do is push a sale on you, your reaction is just going to be to shut down or to try to end that call as quickly as possible, because you may not understand that your business has the need for the product or the service. So it's sitting back and listening and asking questions and making sure that it makes sense in the long run that, oh yeah, I do really need that. Like listening to you, I'm like, oh, I could definitely use Zoomifier. How I would use it, I'm not 100% sure, but I think I could probably figure out a use case. So it's interesting. Just having a conversation about something can definitely change your mind on whether or not it's a need.
Correct. No, I agree. And at the end of the day, I think what's most important for sales is to respect the buyer, right? And the buyer's needs. And so you have to align with the way buyer wants to buy today versus the way you were just forced to sell in a certain way. And if you do it right, then the two meet.
What are some of the key trends that you're seeing and how your business is using content to drive conversion?
Okay, so the first thing is what's out is boring presentations, because if you think about the fact that if people are reluctant to meet, meetings now become very precious. And if you're going to show them 100-slide deck with text thing, that's going to kill you. So that's one very important trend that we are beginning to see a lot more of. Everyone's looking at how do I make my content very engaging. That's one aspect. The second very important trend relates to empowering your sales team to personalize and customize the content, whether it's your internal sales team or external. Salespeople are smart. The really successful ones do that by understanding and reading a customer better. Now, the worst thing that you can do is impose on them a deck that they cannot change or easily personalize and customize. So that's another these are very simple things, but these are the things that bring in the sales kind of thing is the second thing we're finding. The third very important thing we are finding in the sales area is sales is beginning to become more and more scientific rather than a game of bravado or well, the word bullshitting kind of thing. People are really understanding that trust is difficult to obtain, and once you win it, you should hold it very precious. And that means you really have to listen, you have to capture all the information, and you have to build that into an institutionalized knowledge. And so that's a third very important thing that's happening. The most final important thing that's happening in the sales side is historically, sales has been always associated with a salesperson, right? So let's say if you had a current revenue of say $10 million, and if your CEO came in and said, well, next year we want to go to 12 million. That's a 20% increase, right? And if you had 10 salespeople, you'll immediately say, I need 2 more. In sales organizations, the sales performance was only associated with the salesperson, meaning you need more sales, you need more salespeople. I think that's now evolving into how do you more productively and effectively increase the performance of existing salespeople. And so that then says, and how do historically we have increased the performance of anyone, or is by investing in providing them more technology, right? But because and that interestingly is a very new area on the sales side. Marketing, there are thousands of tools. On the sales side, the only thing people know about mostly is a PowerPoint and a CRM system. That's it. And so then they are doing a lot of small bits and pieces. One of the important trend we see is when you have so many 5-10 different components for a salesperson, he or she is immensely confused, and actually they become ineffective. And so what we have seen is they are now trying to have a single platform, a single solution in which they can do everything in the same way. And that's where Zoomifier has gone and has found immense success, being able to enable people to create their engaging content, track and manage it, share it with customers, do all the CRM all in one place.
Streamlining the process and making sure that you're giving your salespeople the tools to actively listen when they are in front of a client. That's what I'm hearing.
That is right. Absolutely. Well done. Thank you for that.
Of course.
Copy your messaging now.
Actively listening is hard. Regardless of who you are, what position you're in, like if you have too many things weighing on your mind, you're not going to be able to accomplish that, or you're not going to be as effective as if you were to simplify everything else around it, reduce that noise, and allow people who are good at reading people and good at building rapport and relationships, which salespeople typically are, give them those abilities, allow them to do that, and you're going to, I would assume, see higher conversion.
Yeah, enable them, empower them, and respect your customers. I think when you do all those things, sales performance just goes up dramatically.
So let's move into my next line of questioning. They are polar opposites. It is about advice. So the first question is, what advice would you give someone who is considering starting their own business?
Okay, just do it is the first important thing. And do not expect success to start with. I mean, here's the interesting thing about entrepreneurship, right? We only hear stories of successful entrepreneurs because they made it. And everyone needs to hear that, except that those stories were very polished by their PR people, and you only saw the final synopsis of what they intended to tell. Everyone goes through tremendous amount of learning, hard work, convincing others, a lot of frustration before they can break through and become successful. I think, but there is no better journey than that. And Rather than focusing on success or failure, I would say focus on the journey. It'll develop you into an immensely good human being, if nothing else. That's the biggest advice I would give. And then the other advice is, when you are successful, be immensely humble because you just got lucky, maybe. It is not that someone did not get successful, was not smart or capable or hardworking. It's the out. So, and again, what I mean by that is, don't focus on the outcome, focus on the journey. The journey itself is so much fun and pleasurable that you would want to repeat it over and over again.
I would 100% agree. Starting my entrepreneurship journey, like looking back at where I was, say, a year ago, I've leveled up so much. I've learned so many things to, better myself, just being more patient, allowing people to speak and sit back and not throwing in my 2 cents right away has been beneficial, can be beneficial. So it is a huge growing experience. And just remember, I think the other part of that is having the reflection on it, right? Take the time to think about how you started your journey and where you are now and how far you've come along the way to get there. So on the flip side of that, what is the worst career advice you've ever gotten? And I think this one's a lot of people stumble on because they get bad advice and they just kind of slough it off. So is there anything that sticks out to you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So one of the things I always caution everyone is, do not go to so-called pundits and successful people for your first advice. One of the, as I like to say, everyone is in a different situation and different context. When you approach someone for advice at the beginning, they do not understand your context. They might have come from a completely different context. And so it is very easy for them to reject any such idea. And then people throw statistics such as only 1 in 5 businesses succeed and, all the blah, blah, blah statistics. I think one has to go with the gut. You don't have to be part of a statistics. And again, if you don't focus on the outcome, but the journey, learn from that, be fluid. It's not that you want to be arrogant and not listen to anyone, but if you start your journey by asking people for direction from day one, you are not the driver, you are being pushed. And that's the most important part, I would say, is just do it, try something, and then see why people did not agree with you. And that's where the humbleness comes in, to say, maybe you are wrong. And it's perfectly okay to be wrong. Every false start means you've eliminated a part of wrong path and you're going more and more towards the right path.
100%. That's great advice. All right. So we've come to the end of the podcast. This is where I give you 90 seconds to plug anything that you're passionate about, whether it's a charity or Zoomifier. So without further ado, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And I don't want to be another salesperson just pitching my product. I think so I will use this as a forum for something more important. I think as humanity, we are at a very, very important threshold in our lives with changing climate and all the disaster that we are seeing around us, some of which is also spilling into wars and misery for everyone. I think every one of us should be very careful and be cognizant of that and try and internally do something that will help us mitigate or maybe even reverse this whole change. And part of the entrepreneurship ought to be, how do we bring change to this world rather than the same old stuff, right? That's my 90-second pitch.
Awesome. Chetan, I really appreciate your time today. It's been a great conversation. I've taken away so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, Brian.